Frogs are one of the most familiar animals to us. So, do you know what their ancestors were? Do you know why they blink their eyes when swallowing large pieces of food? What kind of life did their ancestors lead, and what kind of evolution did they go through? The answers lie within the content of this episode. When we explore animal evolution, we often mention a concept, transitional taxa. Their appearance often falls between two categories of organisms, bridging the gap to clarify the evolutionary context. However, being transitional also means that they inhabit an awkward state between the two, often only making a brief appearance in the history of evolution, as if fulfilling their historical mission. Not to mention whether they survive to the present day, even leaving fossils in the strata is exceedingly rare. Everyone knows that life originated in the ocean. Therefore, all existing terrestrial animals have ancestors that underwent a transition to land, known as amphibious ancestors. For example, during the Silurian period over 400 million years ago, most scorpion-like creatures were amphibious, living both in water and on land. However, there are no scorpions today that can live underwater. The amphibious ancestors of insects, centipedes, and other animals are also extremely rare in the fossil record. However, there is a group of amphibians with special survival skills. They not only survived multiple mass extinctions but even one of their descendants may have survived to this day. This is the Temnospondyli. Earlier, we talked about the transition of vertebrates to land. At first, it was a thriving process. But later, it was almost wiped out by the end Devonian mass extinction. It seems as if they learned something from this extinction event. From then on, most terrestrial vertebrates seem to leave themselves options in various ways. In any case, starting from the Carboniferous Period 330 million years ago, the land officially became the domain of vertebrates. However, vertebrates capable of completely leaving aquatic environments had not yet evolved. Coupled with the fact that most of the world was covered by humid rainforests at the time, the Carboniferous became an era dominated by amphibians in the history of evolution. Among these amphibians, there was a group that rose to prominence, laying the foundation for the early domination of terrestrial vertebrates. That's our protagonist today, the Temnospondyli. This family's early members didn't look particularly noteworthy. For instance, creatures like Dendropiton and Balnerpiton. They seemed rather unintelligent, relying on their small size and non-discriminating appetite. However, they successfully survived the challenges of the end Devonian crisis. More importantly, they developed rapid movements and terrestrial stamina ahead of their contemporaries, becoming the first group of vertebrates to expand outward after the crisis and unlocking the door to a new world. As mentioned earlier, after the end Devonian mass extinction, terrestrial vertebrates in most parts of the world had gone extinct. This was a huge gift to the agile Temnospondyli. With rainforests and swamps gradually recovering globally, and without competition from other terrestrial vertebrates, it was practically a paradise for Temnospondyli. Thus began a prosperous era for amphibians, marking the start of a new chapter. Though the Temnospondyli look quite similar, during my research, I almost gave up. However, upon closer inspection, I realized these creatures actually had some interesting details. Some of them ventured deeper inland, many of which developed scales and shields. This served both to retain moisture and fend off ticks and mites. The more agile ones even learned to climb trees, beginning a long-standing rivalry with insects. Apart from that, due to their transitional state between land and water, some Temnospondyli began transitioning back to aquatic environments. One of the most extreme examples was Brachiosaurus, which retained external gills throughout their lives. Water is the cradle of amphibians, so living their entire lives in water suited them well. In the Carboniferous period, Iberospondylus in Spain even returned to the ocean, becoming the pioneer of terrestrial quadrupeds returned to the sea. However, it's worth noting that most Temnospondyli were armed with fearsome teeth, making them best suited for the apex predators in the food chain, unlike some later evolutionary branches that dominated other niches. Several evolutionary branches within Temnospondyli became regional dominants at different times and places. Among them, Nigerpiton is a particularly interesting example. It evolved two long, pointed teeth, which were too big to fit in its mouth. So, it simply opened two windows on its upper jaw for the teeth to protrude, which made me laugh for quite a while. With various evolutionary attempts, they managed to occupy almost all available ecological niches suitable for amphibians. But fate seemed to play a small jest. During the Carboniferous Period, at the height of the Temnospondyli's dominance, another group of land-dwelling vertebrates appeared, making it clear that royal authority is not everlasting. To avoid the dominance of the Temnospondyli, other terrestrial vertebrates had to explore alternative survival strategies. Some vertebrates began laying their eggs in places that Temnospondyli couldn't easily access, such as on land. This evolutionary path eventually gave rise to an entirely new group of vertebrates, the Amniota. The Amniota developed the ability to lay eggs, freeing their growth and reproduction from the dependence on water, and truly becoming terrestrial creatures in the fullest sense. Afterward, the Earth experienced another ice age. Global forests rapidly declined, known as the Carboniferous rainforest collapse. With the loss of rainforests and water sources, life became tough for the Temnospondyli. They gradually surrendered their dominance to the emerging Amniota. Yet, the Temnospondyli didn't resign themselves to fate. Represented by Eryops and Platyhystrix, early Permian Temnospondyli struggled to adapt to arid environments, undergoing transformations to survive. Unfortunately, they had missed the prime opportunity. As the Temnospondyli grappled with the challenges of arid environments, Amniota had already evolved formidable contenders like Dimetrodon, leaving no room for Temnospondyli to recover. Not only did these Temnospondyli fail to gain any advantage in arid regions, but even their native forest and marsh territories were seized by Amniota. Eventually, they lost all control over the land and were forced to retreat back to the rivers and lakes their ancestors had struggled to leave. Here, the once mighty rulers retained a semblance of dignity. During the early Permian, creatures like Prionosuchus plummeri could reach lengths of 5 to 10 meters, possibly making them among the largest creatures of their time. However, around 250 million years ago, a massive eruption from Siberia's supervolcano reverberated, putting an end to the world's strife. This event, known as the End Permian mass extinction, marked the start of the most scorching and arid period since animal life began, the Triassic. For amphibians heavily dependent on water, this was a catastrophic disaster. The remaining Temnospondyli had to live in burrows alongside the descendants of their former adversaries, seemingly awaiting their fated end. If the Temnospondyli were to go extinct, it would be a heroic epic. Yet, a turnaround occurred suddenly around 228 million years ago, in the Carnian stage of the Triassic. With a distant thunder, an unprecedented ancient downpour arrived. This rainstorm swept across the entire Pangaea supercontinent, transforming a world-spanning desert into vast swamps during a rain season that lasted for 2 million years. This event, known as the Carnian pluvial episode, revived the long-lost Temnospondyli. During these millions of years with scarce fossil records, the Temnospondyli experienced an unexpected revival due to this extraordinary rainstorm, turning the entire world desert into a vast marshland. 228 million years ago, 3-meter-long, nearly half-ton Metaposaurus, even became one of the most common vertebrate fossils of the Carnian stage. However, this rainstorm didn't just revive the Temnospondyli. It also triggered the all-encompassing rise of another group, the phytosaurs. This group looks a lot like crocodiles, and indeed, they are relatives of crocodiles. However, they are not crocodiles. But for simplicity's sake, let's consider them as crocodiles here. Returning to the point, both the phytosaurs and later crocodiles have maintained a lifestyle identical to the original Temnospondyli, with the only difference being that they no longer need to worry about their ponds drying up, which could cause them or their eggs to dry out. It's as if Amniota was specifically sent to deal with the Temnospondyli. Thus, the resurrected Temnospondyli suddenly faced their impending doom again. Among the known instances, a last group of Temnospondyli, the Coolosuchus, lived in the Cretaceous period around 120 million years ago. These creatures were about 4.5 meters in length and weighed nearly half a ton. They inhabited southeastern Australia, which was inside the Antarctic Circle at that time. Due to the Temnospondyli's better cold tolerance compared to various crocodile species, this region became their last refuge. Subsequently, in the mid-Cretaceous, the Earth experienced a global warming trend. Just when I thought the Temnospondyli's story was coming to an end, I stumbled upon more information. We need to go back to the early Permian, around 290 million years ago. As mentioned earlier, to cope with the increasingly arid climate, a group of Temnospondyli started radical body modifications. This group was the Disaurophoidea, and among them, Gerobatrachus took the most extreme path. It was this creature that left a somewhat uninspired legacy for the Temnospondyli, and that legacy was the order Anura, commonly known as frogs. They established the most cult-like evolutionary path within the entire animal kingdom. Living in the Triassic period, the Triadobatrachus already possessed most of the features seen in today's frogs. Isn't their small tail adorable? For instance, they've regressed in terms of ribs and vertebrae, a minimalistic skeletal structure that seemingly offers no apparent advantages and renders their muscles detached. Nevertheless, frogs have raced along this evolutionary path. Starting from the Jurassic, some frog species have already lost most of their bite force, relying solely on their sticky tongues to capture insects. But even when they manage to get their prey into their mouths, they often lack the muscular strength to swallow them. Hence, they've developed peculiar eye movements to help push food down their throats. If you've raised frogs, you might have noticed that some frogs blink their eyes forcefully while swallowing larger prey. This action is actually the result of their eye muscles aiding in pushing the food. Yet, in their truly cult-like evolutionary journey, frogs manage to resolve a dilemma that no other vertebrate has solved. Vertebrates, when transitioning to land, need to shorten their tails and strengthen their limbs, limiting their swimming abilities. Conversely, if they want to thrive in water, they need to strengthen their tails at the expense of weakening their limbs, restricting their movements on land. However, frogs ingeniously dealt with this paradox. They specialized their ankle bones into a lever-like structure, forming a marvelous lever that grants their hind legs powerful explosive force. Simultaneously, they developed a frog-like swimming technique, which doesn't require a tail. This innovation enables their strong hind legs to push them through water while swimming and to leap for quick movement on land. Singing, leaping, swimming, these skills became frogs' expertise. With this unique survival technique, frogs carved a path for themselves amidst the squeeze of dinosaurs, birds, and mammals. Then, Earth was struck by a massive asteroid. However, having a small body also has an advantage. A patch of reeds or a clump of low bushes is sufficient to establish a stable population. If need be, they can even burrow into the ground to hibernate. Thus, despite the Permian-Triassic extinction wiping out over 80% of frog species globally, it also eradicated many of their predators. The remaining frogs rapidly flourished in fragmented wetlands near the equator. During this period, frogs unlocked new skills. They evolved suction cups on their fingertips, allowing them to effortlessly climb trees and navigate rainforests with powerful jumping capabilities. Unfortunately, forests were not as abundant back then, so frogs were confined to small areas for reproduction and survival. Then the Earth's environment changed once again. About 56 million years ago, global temperatures suddenly surged to an astonishing extent. It was so hot that you could wear short sleeves if you were at the South Pole. Near the equator, the oceans were so hot that you could practically use them as saunas. This intense global warming event is known as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, PETM. As a result of this extreme warming, tropical rainforests expanded rapidly, reaching all the way to the North Pole. Along with the expansion of rainforests, the sounds of frogs echoed around the world. Today, there are nearly 5,000 species of frogs, and their order, Anura, is one of the most diverse vertebrate groups on Earth, thriving beyond reptiles and mammals. Their presence is nearly ubiquitous across the globe. The last descendants of the Temnospondyli continue to write their own legends, reflecting on their humble ancestors who ventured from their ancestral homes, traversed untamed lands, and ushered in an era of vertebrate dominance. Their lineage has endured countless failures and rebirths over the course of 330 million years. They've left behind several peculiarly shaped descendants, preserving their ecological niche with their unique survival strategies. Looking at it now, their story is undeniably fascinating. This is Ancient Discovery. See you in the next video. Goodbye.